"You'll never survive in the real world if you keep being so soft, Erica," my mom said, her voice carrying across the room loud enough for everyone at the family dinner to hear. The room fell silent for a moment, forks pausing midair. Then came the awkward murmurs and forced laughter from relatives trying to smooth over the tension. I clenched my jaw, staring down at my plate. "I'm doing just fine, Mom," I said, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. "Fine isn't enough," she replied, waving her wineglass dismissively. "You're too timid, too cautious. You need to be ambitious if you want to succeed." The words stung, but they weren't new. My mother had spent my entire life underestimating me, framing my quiet determination as weakness and my careful planning as a lack of drive. It was like she had a script she couldn't deviate from, and no amount of progress I made ever seemed to rewrite it. My name is Erica, and I'm 32 years old. I've always been the quiet one in the family, the person who avoided conflict and stayed in the background. Growing up, my mother, Helen, made it clear she didn't think much of that. Helen is the definition of a self-made woman, bold, assertive, and unapologetically ambitious. She built her business, a small chain of bakeries, from the ground up, and took pride in her no-nonsense approach to life. But her success came with a cost. She had no patience for subtlety, no time for softness, and no interest in seeing value in a path that didn't mirror her own. As a kid, I tried to win her approval by mimicking her drive. I joined clubs, took on leadership roles, and tried to be as bold as she wanted me to be. But it never felt authentic, and it was never enough. By the time I hit my 20s, I realized that I wasn't going to change who I was just to fit her mold. So I started carving my own path. I worked hard, quietly and steadily, learning everything I could about business. And while my mother dismissed my efforts, I built something on my own, something that mattered to me. Back at the dinner table, my mom turned to my cousin, Emma, who had just gotten a promotion at a big firm downtown. "Now, Emma," she said, smiling brightly, "there's a girl with ambition. You could learn a thing or two from her, Erica." I smiled politely, but inside the familiar frustration simmered. I'd learned long ago that no matter what I did, it wouldn't be enough for her. But I was done trying to prove myself to someone who refused to see my worth. After the dinner, I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. The city lights blurred past the window, but my mind was still replaying my mom's words. "You're too soft. Not ambitious enough." It was the same criticism she'd been lobbing at me since I was a teenager, and no matter how much I accomplished, it seemed like she couldn't see beyond her narrative. When I got home, I dropped my purse on the kitchen counter and collapsed onto the couch. My phone buzzed with a text from Lydia, my best friend. "How'd dinner with your mom go? Do I need to bring ice cream?" I laughed despite myself, typing back, "She compared me to Emma again. And apparently, I'm still too soft for the real world." Her reply came almost instantly. "Oh, please. You could run circles around Emma. She just has a bigger mouth." I smiled at my phone, grateful for Lydia's unwavering support. She'd been my sounding board for years, always quick to remind me of what I was capable of, even when I doubted myself. It hadn't been easy, but I'd worked my way up to being a successful entrepreneur. My company, a small but growing digital marketing agency, was thriving. I'd started it from scratch in my mid-20s, pouring countless late nights and weekends into building something I could be proud of. But my mom never asked about my work. To her, it wasn't real success unless it fit into her mold. Brick-and-mortar businesses, physical products, something tangible she could point to. I didn't need her validation, I told myself over and over. But a small part of me still wanted it, even if I knew it would never come. The next morning, I was at my desk reviewing client reports when a familiar name popped up on my phone screen. Richard. He'd been one of my mom's most loyal employees for years, a steady presence in her bakery chain since I was a kid. "Richard," I answered, surprised. "What's going on?" His voice was calm but serious. "Erica, I thought you should know. Your mom's business is struggling. The past year's been hard and we've had to close a few locations. She hasn't told the family yet, but I didn't want you to be blindsided." I felt a pang of concern. Despite everything, I didn't want to see her fail. Thanks for letting me know, I said. After I hung up, I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. The bakeries had been my mom's life's work. If they were in trouble, she wouldn't ask for help. Not from me, at least. But maybe I could do something about it. I couldn't shake the conversation with Richard. My mom's bakeries were more than just a business. They were her pride, her proof to the world that she'd built something from nothing. The thought of her losing them, even after all the hurtful things she'd said over the years, left a pit in my stomach. For the next few days, I couldn't focus. Every email, every meeting, every task I tried to complete felt overshadowed by the knowledge that my mom's legacy was crumbling, and she was probably trying to shoulder it all alone. Finally, I called Lydia. I can't just sit here, I said, pacing my apartment. I need to do something. She didn't hesitate. Then do it. You've spent years proving you can handle anything life throws at you. If anyone can turn this around, it's you. But she won't ask for my help, I pointed out. She doesn't even think I'm capable. Then don't wait for her to ask, Lydia said firmly. This isn't about proving her wrong. It's about doing what you know is right. That evening, I sat down with my laptop and started digging. I researched her bakeries, their locations, their reviews, even public records on the business's financials. It didn't take long to confirm what Richard had said. Revenue had been declining steadily over the past 2 years, and the closures weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a larger trend. My mom had always been good at baking and terrible at adapting. The business relied on outdated marketing, clunky operations, and foot traffic that had dwindled as online competitors took over. I opened a blank document and started brainstorming. Modernized branding, updated recipes, partnerships with delivery apps. The ideas poured out of me, fueled by years of experience in turning struggling brands into success stories. By the time I finished, I had a comprehensive plan to save the bakeries, and I knew exactly how to pitch it. The next morning, I called Richard again. I want to help, I told him, but I need to know. Will she even listen to me? There was a long pause before he replied. She's stubborn, he admitted, but I think deep down she knows she needs help. If anyone can get through to her, it's you. Okay, I said, my resolve hardening. I'm going to do this. As I hung up, I felt a mix of nerves and determination. This wasn't just about saving the bakeries. It was about proving to myself that I could rise above her doubts and make a difference. A week later, I stood outside my mom's office at the flagship bakery. The familiar aroma of fresh bread and pastries wafted through the air, but it did little to calm the knot in my stomach. This wasn't just a business conversation. It was a confrontation years in the making. I knocked on the door and her voice called out, "Come in." She looked up from a stack of paperwork, her expression shifting from surprise to guarded suspicion. "Erica, what are you doing here?" I sat down across from her, my hands folded tightly in my lap. "I heard from Richard about the bakeries. Mom, I want to help." She frowned, leaning back in her chair. "Help? How?" "I've done the research," I said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Revenue's been declining for 2 years. You're losing customers to competitors, and the closures aren't fixing the underlying problems. I've put together a plan to turn things around, modernizing the branding, improving operations, expanding your online presence. I know it can work." She opened the folder, flipping through the pages with an unreadable expression. When she finally looked up, her voice was sharp. "This is all very impressive, Erica, but what makes you think you're qualified to handle this? You've never run a bakery before." The words stung, but I held my ground. "You're right. I've never run a bakery, but I've spent years running a successful business. I know how to identify problems and create solutions. Mom, I'm not here to take over. I'm here to help you save what you built." She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Why would you care? I've never seen you take an interest in this family business before." "Because it matters to you," I said simply. "And whether you believe it or not, I care about you." Her expression softened for a moment before she shook her head. "I don't need you swooping in and acting like some kind of savior, Erica. I've handled this business on my own for decades. Have you? I asked gently, gesturing to the folder. Mom, you're drowning. You've worked too hard to let it all fall apart now. Let me help you. There was a long silence as she stared at the papers in front of her. Finally, she closed the folder and set it aside. I'll think about it, she said curtly. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. As I left her office, I felt a flicker of hope. For the first time, I'd stood my ground. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to see me differently. The days following our conversation felt like an eternity. My mom hadn't given me an answer, and I found myself oscillating between hope and frustration. I knew she was stubborn, but part of me had hoped the evidence in the folder would be enough to get through to her. Then one evening, Richard called. She's been looking over your proposal, he said. I think it's sinking in, but she won't admit it outright. You might need to push a little harder. Thanks, Richard, I replied, hanging up with a mix of relief and determination. The next morning, I went back to the bakery. My mom was in the kitchen, kneading dough with the precision and focus that had always amazed me. She barely glanced at me as I walked in. Hi, Mom, I said, leaning against the counter. What do you want, Erica? She asked, her tone clipped. To talk, I replied, refusing to be deterred. Have you thought about the plan? She sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. I've looked at it. Some of it makes sense, but... She hesitated, her expression conflicted. This isn't your world, Erica. You don't understand what it takes to run a bakery. Maybe not, I admitted. But I understand what it takes to run a business. And I know you're in over your head. Her eyes narrowed. I've managed just fine for years without your help. Have you, though? I asked gently. Mom, you're losing customers, closing stores, and struggling to keep up with the competition. This isn't about pride. It's about survival. For a moment, I thought she was going to snap at me, but instead, she sank into a chair at the corner of the kitchen. Do you know how hard it is for me to admit that you might be right? She asked, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. Her words caught me off guard, but I kept my tone steady. I'm not here to say, I told you so. I'm here because I believe in what you've built, and I want to help you save it. She looked up at me, her eyes glistening with something I couldn't quite place. You really think this plan of yours can work? I know it can, I said firmly. She didn't answer right away, but when she finally nodded, I felt a wave of relief. It wasn't an enthusiastic agreement, but it was a step in the right direction. Okay, she said quietly. Let's try it your way. As I left the bakery, I felt both exhausted and exhilarated. The real work was about to begin, but for the first time, I felt like my mom was starting to see me for who I truly was. With her hesitant approval, I dove headfirst into the plan. The first step was to assess the damage more thoroughly. I spent hours combing through her financial records, inventory logs, and customer feedback. It was worse than I thought. Several locations were on the verge of closing, and the flagship bakery was barely breaking even. When I presented my findings to my mom, she was visibly uncomfortable. I didn't realize things had gotten this bad, she admitted, her voice tinged with both frustration and defeat. This isn't about blame, I said, softening my tone. It's about moving forward. We can fix this, but it's going to take work. She nodded reluctantly, and I took it as a sign to push ahead. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into the project. I worked alongside Richard and the remaining staff to modernize operations. We revamped the menu, updated the branding, and set up partnerships with local delivery services. At first, my mom hovered over every decision, questioning my methods and second-guessing my choices. Are you sure this is going to work? She asked one morning as I updated the bakery's website to include online ordering. Mom, trust me, I said, trying to keep the impatience out of my voice. People want convenience. If we don't adapt, we'll lose even more customers. She crossed her arms but said nothing, watching silently as I finalized the updates. Despite the tension, there were small moments of progress. One afternoon, as I worked on creating a social media campaign, she brought me a cup of coffee. I didn't realize you were so good at this stuff, she said awkwardly. I smiled, taking the coffee. Thanks, it's what I've been doing for years. She nodded, her gaze lingering on the screen. Maybe I should have paid more attention. Her words were quiet, almost like an afterthought, but they hit me hard. For so long, I'd wanted her acknowledgement, and this was the closest I'd ever come to getting it. As the weeks went on, the changes started to show results. Foot traffic increased, online orders rolled in, and the staff seemed energized by the new direction. Even my mom began to loosen up, offering fewer objections and more hesitant nods of approval. One evening, as we closed up the flagship bakery, she looked around the bustling space and said, "I didn't think we'd ever see this place busy again." "We're just getting started," I replied, feeling a spark of pride. For the first time, it felt like we were truly working together, and maybe even starting to understand each other. The turnaround wasn't easy, but it was happening. By the end of the first month, the flagship bakery was finally profitable again. Customers who hadn't visited in years were coming back, drawn in by our revamped branding and the buzz created by our social media campaign. Online orders grew steadily, and even the staff seemed revitalized, embracing the changes with enthusiasm. But not everything was smooth sailing. My mom still had moments of resistance. One afternoon, while we were reviewing the performance metrics, she frowned at a chart showing the spike in delivery orders. "I just don't understand why people can't come into the store anymore," she said, her tone tinged with frustration. "The whole point of a bakery is the experience." I took a deep breath. "Mom, it's not about replacing the in-store experience. It's about giving people options. Some of these customers might never have come in otherwise." She crossed her arms, clearly unconvinced, but instead of arguing, I opened the comments section of our new Instagram page. "Look at this," I said, scrolling through the feedback. "People are loving the delivery option. It's brought in a whole new audience." She leaned over, squinting at the screen. One comment read, "So glad I can get my favorite croissants delivered. Haven't been able to visit in years, but now I can enjoy them at home." Her expression softened and she gave a small nod. "Maybe you're onto something," she admitted reluctantly. It was small moments like that that kept me going. Slowly but surely, my mom's attitude was shifting. She still had her doubts, but she couldn't ignore the results. Richard was a huge help throughout the process. He'd been with the bakery since its early days and knew the business inside and out. His support made it easier to bridge the gap between my mom's traditional ways and my modern strategies. One evening, after we'd finished a long day of prepping for a local food festival, Richard pulled me aside. "You know," he said, "I've been here for over 20 years, and I've never seen this place run as efficiently as it does now." "Thanks, Richard," I said, feeling a rush of pride. "Your mom might not say it," he added, lowering his voice, "but she's impressed. I can see it in the way she watches you work." That night, I stayed late to finish some paperwork. As I locked up, I found myself looking around the bakery with a sense of accomplishment. This place had always been my mom's domain, a symbol of her grit and determination. But now it felt like something more, a partnership, a shared effort to keep her legacy alive while paving the way for something new. For the first time in years, I felt like we were on the same team, and that was worth more than any metric or sales report. The local food festival was our biggest test yet. We'd worked tirelessly to prepare, rolling out a limited-time menu, setting up a sleek booth with our updated branding, and promoting the event heavily on social media. It was a chance to show the community how far the bakery had come, and to prove that we could compete with modern, trendier businesses. The day of the festival, the energy was electric. Crowds milled about, sampling food and chatting with vendors. Our booth, adorned with fresh flowers and colorful signage, drew a steady stream of customers. I was in the middle of handing out samples when I saw my mom standing to the side, watching the bustling crowd. She looked almost out of place in the chaos, her usual stoic expression softened by what I could only describe as awe. "Mom," I called, waving her over. "Come check this out." She hesitated before stepping behind the booth, her eyes scanning the line of customers. "It's busy," she said, her tone a mix of surprise and pride. "Busy is good," I replied with a grin. As the day went on, my mom started pitching in, answering questions, chatting with customers, and even cracking a few smiles. I caught her explaining the origins of one of her signature recipes to a group of food bloggers who had stopped by, and for the first time, she seemed fully in her element. By the time the festival wound down, our booth had completely sold out. I collapsed onto a nearby bench, exhausted but exhilarated. My mom joined me, holding 2 cups of lemonade. "You did good today, Erica," she said, handing me a cup. "So did you," I replied, sipping the lemonade. She was quiet for a moment, staring out at the emptying festival grounds. "I have to admit, I wasn't sure about all of this at first," she said finally. "The branding, the delivery, the social media, it all felt so different from what I built. But seeing it today, seeing how people responded, I get it now." Her words caught me off guard, and I turned to look at her. "You really mean that?" She nodded, her expression sincere. "I do. I may not always say it, but I'm proud of you, Erica. You've done something I couldn't. You've taken what I started and made it better." Her acknowledgement was a moment I'd waited for my whole life. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, but it felt genuine, and that was enough. That evening, as we packed up the booth and loaded the supplies into the van, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. The bakery wasn't just my mom's legacy anymore, it was ours. The week after the food festival felt like a turning point, not just for the bakery, but for my relationship with my mom. For the first time in years, we weren't at odds. She started consulting me about decisions, asking for my input on everything from new recipes to staffing schedules. One afternoon, as we sat in her office reviewing next month's budget, she leaned back in her chair and said, "You know, I always thought you didn't have the ambition for this kind of work. I guess I was wrong." Her words took me by surprise. "Mom, I've always been ambitious," I said carefully. "Just not in the way you expected." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I see that now. You've done things I never could. Things I wouldn't have even thought to try." There was no fanfare, no grand apology, but in her own way she was acknowledging my worth. It was enough. With the bakery on stable footing, I started to focus on my own goals again. The success of our work had boosted my confidence, reminding me of the skills and determination I'd cultivated over the years. One evening, I pulled out my laptop and began drafting a new business plan, not for the bakery, but for an entirely new venture. The experience had reignited my passion for creating something of my own, and I felt ready to take the next step. Lydia was thrilled when I told her about it. "I knew this whole thing would light a fire under you," she said, practically bouncing in her seat. "So, what's the big idea?" I grinned, showing her my initial sketches and notes. "It's still early, but I'm thinking about a consulting service for small businesses, helping people like my mom modernize their operations." "Genius," she said, raising her coffee cup in a mock toast. "Here's to Erica 2.0, conquering the world one business at a time." Despite the excitement of planning my next venture, I made sure to stay involved with the bakery. It wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about the connection I'd rebuilt with my mom. One afternoon, as we worked together on inventory, she said, "You know, I always wanted the bakery to be something the family could be proud of. I think we've done that." "We have," I agreed, feeling a warmth I hadn't associated with her words in a long time. For the first time, I wasn't trying to prove anything to her. I was just proud of what we'd accomplished together. A month later, I stood outside the bakery, watching the morning rush unfold. The once quiet storefront was now bustling with activity, customers lining up for coffee and pastries, and delivery drivers picking up orders to go. It felt surreal to see it thriving again, not just as a business, but as a reflection of everything my mom and I had worked through together. My mom stepped outside to join me, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed me one and gestured toward the line of customers. I still can't believe it sometimes, she admitted. All of this, it feels like a second chance. I smiled, taking a sip of the coffee. It is a second chance. For the bakery and for us. She nodded, her expression uncharacteristically soft. You know, I wasn't always fair to you, Erica. I thought I was pushing you to be stronger, but looking back, I see that I was just projecting my own fears onto you. Her words caught me off guard. My mom wasn't one to admit fault easily, and hearing her acknowledge the impact of her actions was more meaningful than I'd expected. You don't have to explain, I said gently. I get it now. You wanted the best for me, even if it didn't always come out the right way. That evening, as I sat at my desk working on the business plan for my consulting venture, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in years. The bakery's success had taught me so much, not just about business, but about resilience, relationships, and the power of believing in myself. I glanced at my phone and saw a message from Lydia. So, when's the big consulting launch? I'm ready to be your first client. I laughed, typing back, soon. You'll be the first to know. As I closed my laptop, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The bakery was thriving, my relationship with my mom had transformed, and I was finally stepping into a future that felt entirely my own. A week later, my mom surprised me with a small celebration at the bakery. She'd invited the staff, Richard, and even a few loyal customers. As we toasted to the success of the business, she raised her glass and said, "To Erica, the one who brought us back to life." The applause and cheers filled the room, but it was the look of genuine pride on my mom's face that stayed with me. This wasn't just her bakery anymore, it was ours. And while the journey had been anything but easy, it had brought us closer than I ever thought possible. As I left the celebration that evening, I couldn't help but smile. The future felt wide open, and for the first time I was excited to see where it would take me.